Hello YouTube! So in this video I want to talk about hypocrisy. So that is pretending to hold values that you don't actually hold, or pretending to act in accordance with higher standards than is actually the case. So I think that it's okay to be a hypocrite. I don't think there's really anything wrong with hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is not good grounds on which to criticize another person. So think about, for instance, the vegan activist who sometimes decides to chow down on a cheeseburger, right? So, like, this is the kind of case that I have in mind. I think that's okay. So first of all, it's it's worth being clear that in the majority of cases where we criticize somebody on the grounds of hypocrisy, they probably are going to be doing something bad. So let's take, for instance, the case of the vegan who sometimes eats meat. Well, okay, there is going to be something wrong with their behavior, but I think we can account for what's wrong with their behavior in one of two ways, right? So either they're going to be doing something that they just shouldn't be doing, right? Because so in let's say, for instance, we agree with the vegan that it is morally wrong to eat animals, morally wrong to kill and eat animals, right? Well, in that case, it's morally wrong for this person to be eating a cheeseburger. So what's problematic in that case is that they're eating a cheeseburger. There's nothing problematic about the conflict between their action and their stated belief, right? It's bad to eat cheeseburgers. So what they're doing is bad in exactly the same way that it would be bad for a non-vegan to eat a cheeseburger. If we think that it's morally wrong to kill and eat animals, then we should be just as critical of the non-vegans as we are of the hypocritical vegan, right? So, okay, yes, morally wrong to kill and eat animals, so morally wrong to eat the cheeseburger. Alternatively, if we disagree with the vegan, then we might well think, well, there's still going to be something kind of bad about what they're doing. Namely, they're going to be promoting views that are incorrect, right? They're going to be promoting this moral framework that actually people shouldn't adopt, right? So, in general, right, when somebody pretends to be acting in accordance with some value V, but actually sometimes they do not act in accordance with that value, well, either what they're doing is bad because V is a good thing, right? We should act in accordance with V, and they're failing to do so. Or what they're doing is bad because actually V isn't good, and they're promoting this value that shouldn't be promoted, right? So when somebody's a hypocrite, maybe we can say, yeah, there's going to be something problematic about that. But notice that in those cases, it's not the hypocrisy that's problematic. It's just, well, either they're eating meat and eating meat is bad, or they're saying no, nobody should eat meat, and actually no, it's okay for people to eat meat. So this is just a kind of general point, right? It's like, is there something problematic about hypocrisy beyond these cases? So like beyond these two potential ways that it could be problematic. Is there something problematic specifically about the conflict between like holding a value, promoting a value, and then failing to act in accordance with it? And I think it's very hard. I'm not sure why there would be. In fact, I think that it might well be. So it might even be kind of a good thing. So let's suppose then that, right, there's some good value V, right? You pretend to be motivated by V. You promote V, right? You act as if V is something that you consider worthwhile. Well, if V is actually good, then pretending to be motivated by V is presumably better than consistently being motivated by values contrary to V. For one thing, because keeping up the pretense will require you to do things that are actually in line with V. Because by arguing in favor of V, you might convince other people to adopt V. And it might even push your sincere beliefs in that direction. So this is kind of the like Pascalian point, fake it till you make it. So like, okay, let's suppose that somebody is a vegan activist. They're just pretending though, right? They're just pretending. Well, just in virtue of being a vegan activist, they're probably going to be eating less meat than somebody who is like, because whenever they're in public, right, they can't, they can only eat meat in private, right? They got to be careful about when they eat meat, so they're probably going to end up eating less meat, and they're also promoting it to other people. They're maybe they're successful at getting other people on board with veganism, and maybe by just continuously engaging with these arguments and by adopting the pretense, they end up kind of becoming a vegan, right? What is that? We are what we pretend to be, so we have to be careful about what we pretend to be. So, if it's a good value, then actually it's probably better for somebody to hypocritically promote the value than for somebody to just reject it. But there's another point here as well, which is I think it's worth reflecting on. Like, okay, what is involved in, like, what does it mean to act in accordance with a particular value? I mean, does that require total obedience? I don't think so. So, like, I can say, look, I believe it's wrong to lie. And, probably most people accept that. Like, yeah, at least other things being equal, you shouldn't lie, right? Tell the truth. So I make an effort not to lie, but sometimes I lie. In fact, I lie quite a lot, right? Everybody does. Everybody lies. So I am to some degree hypocritical, but it may still be the case that the value of avoiding lies is guiding my action in some sense, right? Like, it may well be that okay, there's going to be a difference between somebody who believes that it's wrong to lie and has weakness of the will versus somebody who just doesn't care at all and is just happy to say anything, right? So there's a difference between somebody who's guided by honesty, but sometimes fails, right? But it still constrains their behavior. So this person, I think you could say, yeah, I mean, that person is a hypocrite, right? I mean, in some sense, right? They are in fact failing to live up to the standards that they profess to have. I mean, especially if they are very sort of pious about it. If you're very pious about honesty, then certainly you're that's going to be hypocritical if you pretend to have a higher standard than you have. But I think in that sort of case, where somebody is like super pious about honesty and they sometimes lie. The problem is not that they sometimes lie. The problem is that they're super pious about it. The problem is like, hey, you're being a bit too judgmental of others. That would be the case even if they weren't a hypocrite. So even if there's somebody, like, let's say there's somebody who's super pious about honesty and they do in fact always act in accordance with that value, well, that person sucks too, right? What sucks is being super pious about it. Anyway, the general point I'm making here, though, is so I'm saying, look, what is involved in acting in accordance with a value? I don't think that really requires that you always follow that rule. It may just be that it's something that is, it influences you in some sense, and that's probably the case for most of our values. So, hypocrisy, I think, is something that kind of crops up kind of everywhere. It's very difficult to avoid just because of the fact that it's very difficult to act perfectly in accordance with any sort of moral system or moral value. So here's the thing. It seems to me that, like, when you take, say, the vegan activist who is sometimes eating the cheeseburger, why isn't it sort of, look, okay, maybe they're doing something bad, but at the same time we might think, look, it's okay not to be perfect, right? It's okay to sometimes do stuff that maybe you shouldn't be doing. That sounds a little bit incoherent, doesn't it? Now that I put it that way, but okay. The value is guiding one's action, and maybe that's good enough, even if it's not perfect. And if you're militantly promoting a value, then it's going to be hard not to act in line with it in some sense. It's going to be hard not to encourage others to act in line with it. And so you're sort of still pushing things in the right direction, let's say. You're still kind of going in the right direction, even if you're not sort of going there full steam ahead. I suppose the general message is, don't value consistency over doing the best you can. Indeed, don't value consistency over doing good sometimes, right? Um, so if somebody, like, if you take the vegan activist, and let's just say we agree with the vegan that eating meat is morally wrong, um, I think we wouldn't want to encourage them to give up their veganism. If we want to encourage, so if we agree with them that being vegan is morally wrong, if we agree with them that eating meat is morally wrong, then we maybe want to encourage them to stop eating cheeseburgers in private if we discover that they're doing that. But you don't want to, but really, like, that's better than if they decided to become consistent, right? We wouldn't want them to become consistent and start promoting eating meat, right? To start arguing against veganism and continuing to eat meat. That would sort of be the worst case scenario. So what they're doing, maybe the way they're living is good enough, and we don't need to aim for perfection. I think as well, like, this is something that I think this is something that's sort of understood in a lot of the like work on moral philosophy. So I'm thinking of, there's a lot of moral views that are self-effacing. So suppose that utilitarianism is true. So we ought to act in such a way as to maximize happiness. Well, it may well be the case that if we all agreed, if we all conformed to this principle, if we all adopted the principle of acting so as to maximize happiness, if we were to attempt to do that, we might actually make things worse, because people are bad at calculating the consequences of their actions, right? So it might well be the case that if I were to, act in accordance with the rule of maximize happiness, because I'm bad at calculating what tends to maximize happiness and what doesn't, I might end up failing to maximize happiness, and indeed I might end up doing terrible things. So the thought that a lot of philosophers have had is, well, maybe it's better to select a few sort of general rules of thumb, and act in accordance with those. It's useful to sort of adopt kind of heuristics, the sort of heuristics you get in like common sense morality. So common sense morality says, like, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, right? Yeah, just adopt those heuristics. It's better to act in accordance with that than it is to try to maximize happiness. So on the one hand, like, you sincerely believe that people ought to maximize happiness, but on the other hand, you don't actually act in accordance with those values. So there's nothing wrong with thinking that a principle is true, or that we ought to conform to a moral principle, but then acting contrary to it. Now, in the case of hypocrisy, I take it that with hypocrisy, there's going to be a kind of deception, right? Does deception make it particularly bad? Like pretending to act in accordance with the principle when you don't. I mean, obviously that's the difference. Like, a utilitarian is not pretending to act in accordance with the principle of maximizing happiness when they explicitly say, like, I'm not acting in accordance with this, right? When they explicitly say, no, we should act in accordance with these general rules of thumb. So the hypocrite is going to involve a kind of deception that's not present there. But I'm not really sure why the deception is that much of a problem when you think about it. It doesn't seem like that much of a big deal. Everybody lies, right? So this isn't a kind of lie that is so problematic. I also want to point out that I think that in practice, charges of hypocrisy tend to function as ad hominem arguments that are used to dismiss particular views illegitimately. So, like, when you discover that the vegan activist occasionally eats cheeseburgers, right? There'll be some people who will kind of like, they'll just sort of point and be like, hypocrite, and they'll use that to just dismiss veganism. Or think about, like, the climate activist who, sometimes takes a plane to conferences or something like that, right? Like, hypocrite. So, we can dismiss their arguments and their position. But I think that's clearly not an, I don't know. intellectually virtuous move, let's say. I mean, look, it's not relevant to the argument, right? So whether or not it's okay to eat meat has nothing to do with whether or not the people who promote that view are hypocrites. Whether or not it's okay to take planes, whether or not we should be doing more to deal with climate change has got nothing to do with the behaviour of climate activists. And it's frustrating to me when, when like these charges of hypocrisy are kind of used to dismiss positions. And I mean, look, I've been framing this in terms of positions I'm sympathetic with, but it goes both ways. I remember like Jordan Peterson used to have this phrase where he always used to say, don't. What was it? You've got to get your own house in order before criticizing the world, right? And then you'd look at Jordan Peterson's life and you'd think, but you're like a total screw up. What do you, like, get your own house in order before criticizing the world? Are you kidding? But of course, the point really though, it's like, no, I mean, the thing with that is that I think the principle of getting one's own house in order before criticizing the world is just a stupid principle. If it were a principle I agreed with, then, it's like, okay, then Peterson would be right about that. And certainly the mere fact that Peterson himself fails to act in accordance with the principle that he promotes is no argument against that principle. Anyway, I think I've made the point I want to make in this video, and so I'm going to leave it there, and that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Goodbye, everybody. Hello YouTube! So in this video I want to talk about hypocrisy. So that is pretending to hold values that you don't actually hold, or pretending to act in accordance with... Ow! Fuck! Ah.